So good morning. I am so excited to be here speaking with all of you today. But I kind of want to give a little bit of a frame as to the message. So I don't stand before you as an expert in any way, shape, or form. And I have a lot of bumps and bruises because basically this conversation about guided pathways, about meta majors, about a college redesign, that has been consuming my life for the last 2.5 years. So what I hope to do is share a little bit of the insights that Skyline College has had, the process that we've used, in hopes that if we have made mistakes that have led to bumps and bruises, that you don't have to have those exact same mistakes that we did. So I don't stand here to try to tell you this is exactly how you should do it or that we're perfect, because we have made many, many, many mistakes, as I will point out in my presentation for all of you today. So basically, just a little bit of insight about me. I am a transplant to California. So I moved here about 5 years ago from Wyoming. There's only one university in Wyoming, so it's really super easy to try to figure out your path because you're not going UCs, CSUs, right? So when I moved out here, it was like, oh, wow, this is a very complicated system. And so before I had gotten to Skyline College, the campus, so the administration, the faculty, instructional faculty, counseling faculty, and ultimately the staff had embarked on some work around what they call the Comprehensive Diversity Framework. So this is a 60-plus page document that basically outlines kind of this equity framework that they were doing in their call to consciousness to the campus. That was basically saying we need to do some more work to figure out how is it that we are ultimately doing as a college. And so what resulted in this conversation was doing a further data dive. And so that data dive is what led us to figure out that at Skyline College, when we looked at our first-time full-time students, about 13% of them were able to complete their educational goal in 3 years, right? So 13%. We are happy to report that that is now 16%. So we've made a little bit of an improvement. But that still means that 84% of our students are not able to do that, right? When we looked at how many units are our students taking, on average, a Skyline College student will take about 100 units. They will complete 80 of them. And we know that they only need 60 of them in order to be able to graduate or to transfer. And so we realized that that has implications on financial aid and their progress moving forward into another institution or even out into the workforce. The last thing that we looked at in that data dive is to look at kind of persistence from fall to spring, fall to fall. And we found that part-time students, which is the largest portion of our student base, part-time students, we only retained about 50% of them from fall to spring. Fall to fall, that number went down. And so it was really at this moment that we said, did we come into education as educators to wake up every morning and go, how am I going to fail 84% of the people I come into contact with today, right? We realized that we weren't doing enough, that we were failing as an institution, and that's what we call our brutal truths. So the brutal truths we all wear, and we bring them into everything that we ultimately do. So the Comprehensive Diversity Framework, which was the discussion about equity gaps, about race, and about social justice, combined with this kind of data, led us to kind of this urgency around student success. So we realized that we needed to do more. And so we started to engage in different conversations. So those conversations were more about what are the barriers, like the immediate barriers that are preventing students from ultimately being able to achieve their goals. And so is it transportation? Is it food? Is it tuition? Is it textbooks? So we were engaging in these types of conversations and working on programs and leveraging resources. But at this point, we realized that we weren't necessarily thinking critically enough or reflective enough. And when I went through the equity training series, I saw this. Can you go? Is the quote next? No, the quote is, okay. So saw this quote and I thought it summed it up nicely. Every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results it gets. Skyline College, higher education, was designed to get the results that the state of California is getting right now, right? We are doing what the system is designed to do. And so if we wanted to have more than 13% of our students ultimately being able to complete in 3 years, we had to think differently about how we were ultimately doing things. I know that for me personally, my kind of aha moment was when I saw the data. It's very similar to what you saw today. I went back and I was like, you know what? In my classroom, my success rates are this. My retention rate is this. I'm fine. And I'm like, I don't believe it. Like, I don't believe it, and I can critique any data set that you give me. Then I started talking to my students, and I realized that my class may be different than other classes. I also realized that I had successfully navigated this and then returned to higher education. And I had been indoctrinated to basically do the same things that I had been modeled up to that point. So I was part of continuing the system that is getting the results that it was getting. And so that was kind of my aha moment. And so the campus has engaged in this kind of aha moment. And so we ultimately have decided to do what is called the comprehensive college redesign. So our president, Dr. Regina Stanback-Stroud, a number of years ago made a promise. And that promise is that we would empower students at every point in their educational journey to get through, and to graduate on time. And so as a campus, we had to figure out, well, what is it that we were going to do in order to be able to achieve that promise? So we created our 3 signature components. And so guided pathways and meta majors is probably the most familiar. It's what we're here for today. We do also have the Promise Scholars Program, which is a CUNY ASAP replication model, and then transformative teaching and learning. Originally, we thought, well, this is the professional development, and let's do some kind of cool things in the classroom, but we realized that transformative teaching and learning has to go beyond the classroom. And so this has been redefined as kind of taking a student-ready mindset, which says we shouldn't expect students to come ready to us at Skyline College, but instead, whatever student is in front of us, we will meet them and their needs wherever they are at. And so we have to, as an institution, be prepared for that. So it's engaging every employee as both a teacher and a learner in order to be able to have kind of this student-ready mindset. So it's a little bit different. So this is how we have decided to proceed in our journey of college redesign. And so at this point, there's one thing I'm truly adamant about after the 2.5 years is that this process needs to be organic and unique to every institution. And that is because every institution has a different student population with different needs. And so if it's to be truly responsive, you have to kind of know. And so it can't come from a box. And so it has to be unique. And so our definitions are going to possibly be different than City College's definitions, as they should be. But just as I go through the rest of my presentation, I want to make sure that you understand how we've defined meta major and guided pathways. So that's where we're going to go next. So meta major is, you can go ahead and put that. So a meta major, how we've defined it is that it's a grouping of related fields of study designed to simplify the process of choosing a major, right? So this is a little bit different than how the state is defining it. We also made sure to define it as a student-facing piece. And what we mean by that is we were not really at the point where we could change our division structure or our department structure. And a lot of times students don't need to know about that in order to be successful in getting a degree. So the student-facing piece is just a layer of how students could actually get information about the degrees and certificates that we offer at Skyline College, but it wouldn't change our division structure or our department structure. It was simply a student-facing kind of marketing piece is how we saw meta majors. So this is error number 1. I'm gonna ask you to hold on to it. It refers to the process of selecting a major. Just hold that. I'm gonna go on to another, but I'll return to it, I promise. So the second is the guided pathway. And I think around the state, when this first started to be talked about, a lot of times we said, oh, the guided pathway is simply the intentional course sequence. So if we tell students what order to take the classes, we've solved the problem. Well, unfortunately, it is not that simple, because if it was, the counseling faculty would be going, hello, we do SEPs, which tell students exactly what order to take the courses in, right? So we already have those. So if we have it in our structure, and we still get these results, it means that something has to change. So we have defined a guided pathway as basically the integration of student services, the Learning Commons, which is the academic support, and basically instruction. So all of these parts have to come together to create an intentional student experience. So we had to start thinking about what is the experience we want every single student, no matter what degree or certificate they're in, to have. That is, to us at Skyline College, the guided pathway. So specifically, some of the things that we have been doing, this next one you can fly. There should be 2, 3, 4. Stop there. Okay, so these are some of the things that are included in our guided pathway. So we have been looking at on-ramp processes. This is dual enrollment. This is the high school liaison program. This is figuring out how our students, before they're even knowing that Skyline College is an option, how are we ultimately figuring out how to connect with those students, to take our services to them, to help them get onto campus. We're also taking a look at our intake processes. We know a lot of times on CCC Apply, it's like, what degree or certificate do you want? It's one of the first questions students are asked, right? I didn't know when I first applied, and I'm glad that I didn't have to select one, right? This is why we have a lot of accounting majors, because it's alphabetically the first one, right? Especially at Skyline, it's our number one, and a lot of students don't end up getting that degree or certificate. So not only was it about choosing that, but we also wanted to start talking about careers at this point, right? Is don't necessarily think of it as just a course of study, but where could you ultimately go with that? Of course, the intentional course sequences, which is what you will all get to engage in today. So that is something that is a part of our guided pathway. But we wanted to make sure that there were career and academic milestones on the intentional course sequence that students were going to see. And then embedded counseling, academic support, and we're trying to get like a CRM to try to help students figure out where they're at on their path, to try to give them advice as to like, hey, if you take this course, it might actually make you stay an additional semester. Are you sure you want to register for that, right?
What's the CRM?
It's like a, what is it? It's a customer relationship management system. So basically it's like a dashboard where students can see their progress, but faculty and staff and administration can also see their progress. So it's something that we don't have, but a lot of institutions actually do have. And if you've looked at kind of the Georgia, have you guys brought Georgia State?
We haven't brought them here, but I've presented on them. We have Starfish, which has that functionality.
Right. We do not have Starfish, though. Starfish is awesome right here.
Amazing.
So
Our Starfish coordinator is in the back there, if you have any questions.
yes. So all of these kind of wrapped together is what we are defining as a actual guided pathway for a student. So until we've built all of this out, we are not technically done with guided pathways. So just this is a little bit different than what the state is ultimately talking about. So this sounds all fine and well. I'll go back. So let me look at where I'm at. So I'll go back to the error, right? So basically what we did is we started and we decided as a college, let's go with meta majors, right? Like we'll save the guided pathways. There's a lot of parts to that. So let's start and get something that is concrete. Because again, remember, we had this urgency around student success. So we wanted to try to help students even when we were building other parts of this. So we figured meta majors, student facing, helping them pick a degree or a major. Unfortunately, we lost sight of our brutal truths in that moment. So our first strategy was to bring everybody together, and we did what were called sorts. So we put all of our degrees and certificates on different note cards, and we gave tables of faculty, staff, and administration these, and we said, okay, sort them. It's going to be like Sesame Street, right? One of these things is not like the other. Which one doesn't fit in? Sort them into like categories. So we did that. We did it a number of different times on flex days. And guess what we did? We sorted right back into status quo, because we were like, oh, business, it goes in the business division, so let's go ahead and do that, right? So we had the opportunity to think about our institution differently, and we did it. So indoctrinated that we were like, nope, that's a humanities. What is a humanity, right? Like, there's questions. And so we realized that by just putting the end goal of these sorting as we just want to help students pick a major, it was all from our perspective and perception. Like, we had made the error of not bringing students into the space at that time. We also made the error of, we are the experts, and so we of course would know how to do this. So we had to create a meta-major task force because we realized that this was going to be much bigger than we originally thought. So ultimately, they were supposed to work, figure out a process, lead kind of the campus through it, and bring us a proposal that says, this is how many meta-majors Skyline College is going to have. And these are the degrees and certificates that are going to be housed in them. Seemed super simple, right? We, for a whole entire semester, had conversations about, should they be tall or should they be short, right? So should we have like 5 or 6 meta majors, and so they're tall because there's a lot of degrees and certificates, or should we make them short, like 8 to 10, and there's not as many degrees and certificates in them, right? And we didn't have anything to move us forward. And so that is when the work team said, hold up, we're gonna have to actually create some design principles. So I was super excited to see that you guys already have design principles, because this was, what am I up to, error number 3? This was our third error, is that we were trying to make decisions without kind of a framework with which we would be making decisions by. So we created, these are our design principles, and they're just the design principles that are specific to meta majors. So we have other design principles for the whole project, and then some for mapping, so they kind of change depending on what it is that we're ultimately doing. So of course, we wanted to make sure that there was a focus on students and their perspective and perception. This is where that error in definition started to come to light, because we said if we're going to be changing the statistics, we need to come up with a meta-major process that is going to help us reduce the number of units for students. Because if we don't reduce the number of students, then we have failed to make any kind of change. And so we put efficiency for students as one of our design principles, because if there's 2 options, whichever one is most efficient for students, we're gonna choose that one, because it's gonna help us change the brutal truth that we have as an institution. Of course, some of these other ones, we'll go through them. Inclusion and equity was a very large one, and then keep an open mind was just to be able at the end of the day to question and say, is this status quo, or have we changed or transformed enough? And so it was our ability to check back and just make sure we weren't doing something because we had always done something that way. And so at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and hang on to this slide. So at this point, what we decided to do is something very similar to what you're going to do today. We brought faculty, instructional and counseling faculty together. There was staff and administration in the room. We brought them together one Friday. We sat them down with their department. We gave them specific kind of guidelines. So we said, what we are doing is we want you to map, but we were mapping with the end goal of getting data, right? So actually, I think that is the next slide, sorry. So the meta majors team wanted these 3 sets of data. And so that's how we embarked on our program maps. Our program maps weren't with the goal of how is a student going to interface with this. That wasn't the first goal of maps. So that was error number 4. But we were trying to move us in the meta-major conversation because that's what we wanted. And so we ultimately mapped to try to get some data, right? And so we used course mapping, social graphs, and student feedback. So like I was saying, we brought everybody together. We said, looking at our data, the school that we transfer to the most is San Francisco State University. So assume that a student is in your degree program transferring to San Francisco State University. You're going to map your core required courses, so the ones that are specific to your degree. Don't worry about GEs unless they are a prerequisite to something. And here's how we want you to think about it. Don't think about it as fall, spring, summer, fall, spring, summer. Think about it in terms of units. Because we only wanted to create one map. We didn't want a part-time map and a full-time map because we didn't want part-time students, who are the largest number of our population, to feel like other, like they had a different map, right? So from that equity and inclusion, we knew that if we went 0 to 15, it didn't matter if it took you 3 semesters to get through 0 to 15. That was fine. You were still on the path that everybody else had at the exact same time. So it was really more about, in the first 15 units, what did we want students to be taking or to be doing on academic milestones or career milestones? And so it was kind of a different way than thinking about that. But we wanted to look at what would it look like if we took those 0 to 15 units and spread them over 2 years, over 3 years, over 4 years. So there were different year maps, but we tried to stick with the unit values to kind of make it so that we only had to do one. We also said you're going to map for a full-time student, and you are going to map with them coming in needing kind of meeting transfer level, but with the just-in-time support is what we call it. So it would have been like the English that has more units and the math that has more units. And so we had some other rules. We sat them all down so that there was consistency because, again, we were looking for data. And so now I'll show you how ultimately this all ended up with like design principles being applied, all of that. So when we took all of these maps, we entered them into what's known as a pivot table. So it puts all of the degree certificates on one side and all the degrees and certificates going across. And what we were doing was looking for what core required courses appear in each degree and certificate across the whole entire campus. Because if they share coursework, then it probably means they should be grouped together. And then that way, if a student changed degrees in this area, they would probably not be losing units because they share the same core required courses. Of course, GE is going to be shared amongst all the degrees, so that's why we left GE out to begin with, right? And so really what ended up happening is, you can go to the... There were, all of a sudden, when we put it into a social graph, you started to see clusters of where degrees and certificates were coming together. And so I've brought you a very convoluted picture. This is what the social graph looked like. So you can start to see kind of the clusters, right? You can't read the degrees and certificates because they're too small. But basically where you see really thick lines, it means that there are more core required courses that connect. So it's showing the connections between all the degrees and certificates on campus through the mapping of the coursework that we did, right? So this is kind of what we saw. But you can see that there are some outliers. And because we were doing core required courses, those were generally our CTE programs, because they don't necessarily share core required courses with other degrees and certificates. And so at this point, our design principle of efficiency for students didn't give us all of the answers. And so we had to go to our next design principle. You can go ahead, sorry. Is there a way for us to think about what they might be having as a community contribution? And so here you saw where we engaged in conversations about, dance currently in our division is with kinesiology, which is like the varsity sports, physical education, physiology, kinesiology, all of those. So it's like, does it belong more there, or might we think about it in performing arts with theater and some of, theater, music, art, that way. And so that was a conversation to try to figure out, could we place some of those outliers in that? That didn't help us with all of them. And so ultimately we had to go to the next one, which was about the student perspective and perception. This was probably one that we should have gone to earlier than what we did. But we basically went and we talked to the students in those CTE programs. We talked with all of them. Because we were trying to figure out, if you were coming onto campus and you wanted to go into cosmetology, where would you look for information about that degree or about that certificate? And so we were trying to get their insights. And so these were some of what we found. Very interesting, like the cosmetology students, there was no real consensus. Some of them said, I do it because it's artistic. Like, I'm going to go into stage makeup and I'm excited about the art behind it. Some of them were like, no, I'm an entrepreneur. This is about business. I would look for it in business. Then others were like, do you know how much science goes into this? It should really be in the sciences. After all, it has ology at the end, right? And so it's like psychology, right? That's how the students ultimately were thinking. And it's like, okay. We saw massage therapy. They were like, yes, with all the biology prerequisites, we're more aligned with healthcare. It's like wellness. Auto, some of them were like, yes, I see myself as an engineer in technology. But then there's some that are like, I see myself as an entrepreneur in business. So we were able to sit there and go, okay, we defined this as a student-facing piece. It doesn't affect our divisions. It doesn't affect our departments. So could we possibly put degrees and certificates in multiple meta majors? Because if it's about where students are trying to find information, why not? So we made the choice based on our design principles to do that. So if you went to some of our materials, you would find that there are degrees and certificates that are in multiple meta majors because it's a student-facing piece. So now it made it sound super easy and fun. Again, this took us 2.5 years to get to this point. And I will say to all of you, I applaud you because today you are going to do even more than what we have originally done. We are just now at Skyline College engaging in the conversation about GE and adding GE to the course maps. So mind you, our course maps in version 1 have just core required courses. Nothing else. So you all are going to be so much further ahead than we are after the conversations that you're having today. So these are our 4 meta majors. That's what appeared. It's very unique because when you go around the state, a lot of times you will see 6 to 8 or 10. We were very worried when that social graph came up with 4 pretty clear and distinctive meta majors. And so we went back to students and we're like, is 4 enough? Are we, like it's so odd. And students were like, oh, that's like the In-N-Out model. Because, at In-N-Out, it's so efficient because you want either 1 patty or 2, and do you want cheese or no cheese? Like, you got 4 options, right? And so to them, this was so much more usable. And so our meta majors are arts, languages, and communication, business, entrepreneurship, and management, society and education, science, technology, and health. And I will spare you the whole entire story that went into picking the logo, picking the color, and picking the titles, because that's a good hour-long conversation about how that process happened, right? So there are other things once you get to the point of like, these degrees and certificates go together. There's a whole other process that's coming. So we held our first meta major preview day in August. It was the first time that the new incoming students were introduced to meta majors. And so it was a really cool event where we basically brought instructional faculty to interact with students in their different meta majors. And so some of what they were able to see, this is a marketing piece from that. So you can see we've taken the big long list of what could possibly be degrees and certificates. This is more of what a student would see. If they went to the website, they're going to see something where you're going to have the 4 meta majors. They can click on it. And if they were to click on science, technology, and health, it would take them to this clunky, not very beautiful site. This is still in progress, but this is, like we say, version 1.0, and it will get better as we fix the bugs. But basically what it will do is you can scroll through. This is just a screenshot of them. And if you clicked on one of them, ultimately it would take you to the catalog, which would tell you what are the core required courses. Of course, that catalog is not user-friendly, but at least gets them a step closer to knowing what it might be, and it has a little bit of narrative about that. They can also apply just right from the meta majors. So it gives them the opportunity to explore that. And then this, interestingly enough, I trusted the marketing department just to put it in my slide deck. And then as I was looking at it last night, I was like, ooh, this is so this is error 10,000. So this is kind of what we were thinking would be the mock-up. However, I looked and we have fall and spring on there, which is not how we are supposed to be mapping. And it also starts a student in their very first semester with biology and chemistry together, which I don't believe was on the original map. So you see, even when we mapped, in taking that information and putting it into a format, we even made mistakes, and now I'm here standing in front of you showing you a really poorly done map. But on the bottom, we do have a first start of kind of what might be some of the academic and career milestones as well. So this is just a little bit about what Skyline College has done. And this is kind of how we are redesigning our college. Again, we are nowhere near being close to done. And so are there any questions for me? That was kind of very quick. Yes.
A lot of these two terms are rather new to me, and maybe more of the audience is familiar with them than I am. What is a social graph, and was that a depiction of one earlier, the thicker and thinner lines that you referenced?
Yes, so the social graph is the one with the dots.
Could you go back to that?
Sure. And it's just a way to show connection between.
This was how Skyline tried to identify meta-majors, is that
Yes,
right?
yeah.
And
So we used our program mapping to get us to a point of where we could move forward with meta majors.
do the X and Y positions indicate something?
So I don't believe so. I think it was just trying to.
Oh, so the fact that the automotive is far to the left isn't indicating anything,
No.
despite that climate protection is far to the right?
No.
Okay. So these were just
It's really like it's this huge and one of our former deans, her husband is a data scientist, and so he created the program that ultimately allowed us to do that. And so
so
I am communication studies, which means you're asking questions that
I'm sorry.
Just kidding. So I will try my hardest to answer your questions.
Also, do we? I'm not familiar with us here having a meta major exactly. Although I think there's clearly, I guess, departments that comfortably group together.
I don't think City College is engaging. Let me not speak for City College.
Look into that, or is it to use the process you use after meta majors to bring about guidelines and to investigate that?
So there's going to be a little bit more information on City College and where we're heading after Jessica and Julian West's presentation. So hold tight and I'll answer that
Okay, so
question.
this is more like a demonstration of a successful implementation that we might use as a model in what we're going to talk about in a bit. Does that seem right?
I'm not even sure I would say it was successful,
One example.
to tell you the truth. This is just what we did as we were stumbling along in the guided pathways. We thought meta majors were going to be easy, and then we realized it's just simply like a structural piece. And so the real change comes with the the guided pathway itself, because that's all of the support and the wraparound services. And I mean, like, kind of our counseling redesign is probably one of the most impactful pieces of our guided pathways work that's happened so far. So this was just kind of giving you a little bit of how we were ultimately approaching it.
All right, no other questions for Jessica?
Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to say I like this slide a lot. Actually, just the way that the groupings. I think it's a really nice visual, and if I were a student looking at that, that would just help me see how things connect. So. And then if you paired that with the one that was like it almost looked like a calendar. It had the little grid of semesters. I think the two of those together are a really nice support for a student.
Thank you.
Jessica, can I ask a question about that map?
Yeah.
So on your map, you have support services at the very bottom.
Yes.
What was your process in determining which support services go with which and all of that? Because I think that's pretty crucial, and we're talking a little bit about that today, so I just wanted a quick comment on that.
So our counseling department engaged in a redesign where they were sitting there thinking about how are they ultimately going to how can they use kind of counseling appointments to help connect students to support services. Because right now we have great support services, kind of like what Michelle was saying, is we have a ton of support services, but students don't necessarily know. If you go to our website, we have SparkPoint. It says SparkPoint, but as a student, I don't know that that's where I go to if I need food, right, or other resources. And so basically what they did is they sat down and they engaged in conversations with the campus, and they were like, how can we ultimately bring all of these together? And so they created smaller subcommittees that would look at what are kind of some of the career milestones, what are some of the academic milestones, and we're still building out kind of academic supports. But for example, we start with My Majors. So this has questions for students to fill out, and it would be before they came to the counseling session. And this is going to ask them like how they did in high school, what classes did they enjoy, what are they interested in, but it's also going to ask them questions about what might be some of the barriers that you would have or you foresee having as you go through. So counselors get that printout and they can look at that, and then they can engage in more conversation to try to build out a more specific one for students. These are kind of vague and general. And then of course, they get to talk about the meta majors. They get to show them the map. And I guess I should say that this map is not going to live on the website as of right now. It's not going to be something, because curriculum changes so often that we thought it would be very cumbersome to do that. And so this is what counselors will have, and they're going to use it as a visual as to, let's take a look at what this might look like. Does this seem like something that you would want to do? So it's really more of like a talking piece, and then they're going to move into the SEP where they can build out one of these for a student that's specific to the barriers that they may have identified and the support services that they would need. They're also doing a needs-based counseling model, so that will start in the fall. And so during that session, they're trying to figure out like how certain are students about this major, and if they're not certain, then maybe we can give them or recommend career courses or some kind of like introductory courses that would help them that way. I was going somewhere with that, I promise, and I just lost it. But basically, there comes a point where it's become our responsibility now. Counselors have said we will take the responsibility to, once we figure out that students might need different supports, to make the call instead of putting it on students to have like, oh, here's the information for SparkPoint, you can find them here, is that we are now with the CRM going to be able to say, hey, SparkPoint, these are students and you need to reach out to them. So we're trying to do it kind of in the counseling session, but be a little bit more about attaching those. A lot of it is that's the conversation that's going to start to happen with GE. That embedded counts or that needs-based counseling of low, medium, and high. If a student is high needs, we're going to try to get them into sections that have supplemental instructors or embedded kind of tutoring within the course. So it's about cataloging those and knowing about all of it based on the need of the student that the counselor is ultimately identifying. So there's a lot kind of in that, but I wish we would have engaged as faculty members in conversations about, this is a really difficult course for students. It kind of is the gatekeeper course. What kind of supports could I ultimately recommend to students in this particular semester or this time period? That would have been such a help when we were thinking about certain things. And so again, this is where City College is further ahead than we are because we haven't engaged in those conversations. So
we have time for one more question in the back.
I'm curious about when you brought folks together in these spaces, who were the stakeholders and how were you able to get people in the space other than like that task force or that work group that you referred to?
Right. So when we were doing mapping or when we're doing anything where we need the campus to come together, a lot of times we will use flex days, but we realize that flex days are just that. So we do have an unflexible flex day, which is a mandatory flex day. And so a lot of times we'll try to do that. But for the mapping event, we did it as a campus-wide division meeting. And so because division meetings are required, we get a higher number of turnout at that point. If divisions couldn't be there, then they were still, there was kind of like this mandate that you had to have this map done by a certain time. And so we put that out there because we knew we had to do the data analysis behind the maps. And so it was really just trying to leverage deans to make sure that deans were making sure that departments were ultimately getting this done. We fed them. That tends on our campus to really work, and it was like a Friday afternoon when we generally don't have classes or meetings, so we tried to be strategic with that. I think that comprehensive diversity and that framework and the discussions that we're engaging in have been prominent enough that a lot of people are understanding. I say it's kind of like our scarlet letter to wear that 13% or that 16%. And so we all have to own it. And so I think just by kind of trying to change it that way, more people are willing to come to the table. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, mostly. I was just interested, like, who actually were those people?
Oh, okay.
And was it hard to get folks at the table? Because I feel like sometimes we're all working so hard, and how do we leverage getting the people we need in those spaces?
So we had the instructional faculty from the department, and then we had counseling faculty with them, and then the deans were also there engaging in the conversation. A mistake that we made was not having students there. So that's another one of our errors. And then I know that today you guys kind of have math faculty and English faculty. That would have been like, that's brilliant. We didn't think of it, so we didn't bring those stakeholders to the table. So it was very insular, and I think that's why we haven't had a lot of movement on our maps up to this point. So those were kind of the stakeholders that were there, and I think it was because it was mandated to do it that they actually showed up. So it's still an issue that we deal with of how do we get people to the table all the time.
All right, can we give a round of applause for Jessica Hurless from Skyline College?